Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. We are thrilled to have you here for our rescheduled tree diversity event. My name is Anna Healy. I am the urban forester and naturalist here for the city of Fitchburg, but I am not the headliner tonight. Tonight we are lucky to have a local tree expert and tree diversity expert in Jay Weiss. He is the principal of the Cambridge Tree Project. And you might be wondering, well, what is the Cambridge Tree Project? And this is something that Jay founded, so not only is he's the principal now, he actually started the whole organization. And my understanding is it started in 2008 with a donation of 4 Allegheny service berries to the local school, their environmental club. And what started then has grown to I think it's been over 1,000 trees that have been donated to the village of Cambridge, and it's really transformed the urban forest in the village of Cambridge. When Jay started in 2008-ish?
2006.
2006,
was the
thank
first
you.
Year, so
okay.
Close.
Okay, close. When you started, was there 35 different tree species in the village?
Correct, yeah.
And now there are 167, if I'm not mistaken?
Right, we're up to 167 species, which is more than a lot of arboretums have.
Yes.
So it's a real arboretum experience as you're walking through the village, because you never know what you'll expect to see and find.
And I think one of the really highlights is, not only are there 167 different tree species, everything is well represented. When Jay started, 70% of the trees were either ash or maple, if I'm not mistaken, and now the percentage of those two species, ash and maple, is down to 17% or so.
Yeah,
yes.
We're below 17 now.
Yes, which is awesome. So not only are we lucky to have a local tree expert here, and someone who really does appreciate tree diversity, he also understands how to get it done and how to get it done in the urban setting. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Jay, and he's going to tell us a little bit about the Cambridge Tree Project, what's happened in Cambridge, and then we're going to take a look at the different tree diversity here in Quarry Hill Park.
Thanks, Anna.
You're welcome.
Hello, everyone. And I'm assuming that most of you have kind of an interest in trees, or you can kind of nod, or if you have if you know a lot about trees, anyone? Don't know much about trees? Okay. Just trying to get a feel for where you're at. When I started the Cambridge Tree Project, I started keeping meticulous records of every tree we planted, which was 1,300 trees. Of the 1,300, 1,000 of them lived. So roughly 80% survival. These were trees planted rarely in parks, mostly along the streets in our village of Cambridge. The thing that I did every year was I made record of whether or not the tree survived, and then how quickly it grew in inches. So over 15 years' time, I've taken over 7,000 measurements of trees. And when they get larger, it's really easy. I just put a 10-foot pole next to the tree, and I stand back roughly the height of the tree, and I take a picture of it. Then I can use the pole to scale how high the tree is. One of the trees we planted in 2006 is now 55 feet tall. So 55 feet, that's more than double what this tree is. It's almost triple of what that tree is. That tree was a sycamore planted between a sidewalk and a street, not a lot of room to plant. It's grown over 4 feet a year. Not been watered, it's not being taken care of really even. So we have other trees that grow as much as 3 to 6 inches a year, like a ginkgo, for example, if you've ever heard of that. Anyhow, so I have all this data, and the idea is that eventually there'll be enough data where I can start cross-tabulating, meaning I can start drawing inferences on details. Trees that are planted in poor soil, those planted in better soil. And I share the data widely. I actually have copies of it, so before you leave, if you'd like to know more than 100 tree species survival and growth rates, if you're looking for fast growth, I can help. Anyway, so what I was hoping to do is focus on some specific trees that we have really close. And then, Anna, were you thinking we could walk around at one point and start looking at these?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
Yes, we can walk around and take a look at the different trees here. We have replaced all the ash trees in this park with a whole variety of trees, and we're trying to get a lot of cover established and canopy established in this part of the park, because at some point the roads will get connected, and while that's a cornfield now, it will be houses at some point.
Okay. How'd you identify the soils?
At this point, it's strictly observation. So generally speaking, the older part of our village has really good, loamy, not compacted soils. The new neighborhoods are the opposite. They're terrible. Generally speaking, we have maybe 4 inches of dirt, and below that is compacted clay because construction equipment is ridden over it. Terribly slow draining, and it really slows down the tree growth rates. So basically, if it's a new neighborhood, that's one category. If it's an existing neighborhood that hasn't had any recent digging, excavation, or whatever, that would be the second category. But that's all I have right now, are subdivision results and traditional neighborhood results.
And we have the same thing with subdivisions. We really try to get the soil probed before we plant trees, but it's tough, and a lot of times it's exactly as you say. It's 4, maybe 5 inches of topsoil, and the rest is whatever is compacted left over from construction, which is not great for trees.
Yeah, a lot of gravel,
Yes.
and that tends to drive,
Yes.
especially if it's limestone derived
Yes.
gravel, it drives the pH up. So
Yes.
all of a sudden you become very limited
Yes.
in which trees you can choose among because of the soil compaction, the pH, slow draining.
Question here.
Before we look at the trees, could we have an introduction to or an overview of what we're doing besides learning about trees and learning about an interesting project? I think that this, right, we learned about this from the sign in the library.
Sure.
There's a plan for some investment in diverse trees in Fitchburg, and this is to inform the general public, get donations. Why are we here?
Okay, so that's a really good question. So basically the point of an event like this is, if you look around, most of the trees here in the city are privately owned, and on public property we were really trying hard to diversify the canopy, we're trying to get to a 30% canopy goal in the urban service area, but that's really going to be dependent on people who own lots and property to also plant trees and to plant a diversity of trees. And at this moment, there's a lot of trees coming down in the city of Fitchburg because of emerald ash borer, also due to development. And so as those trees are being replaced, we want to be able to showcase to citizens, you know what, you don't have to default to a maple. There's a lot of different species out there that you can choose from, and you might recognize that maple leaf, and nothing against maple trees, but we have a lot of them, and we could really use other kinds of trees in our urban forest for resilience. And the whole idea is, I don't know if any of you passed the ash tree coming here today. If you did, it was either treated and looked fine or was almost dead. And so that's something that, moving forward, we'd like to avoid. I'm not sure what our private percentage of ash trees is, but our public percentage has been pretty low because we've been working at, it was, I think, 12%, and it's getting lower every year. But our ash trees get diluted because we are planting between 400 and 600 trees every year in new developments. Well, none of that's ash, so it gets a little bit diluted. We still do have a lot of ash canopy that we're trying to replace. So the whole idea is to try and get folks to realize, like, there's a whole lot of different trees out there you can choose from, and they will do the same things that you are hoping to get from a maple tree. So that's kind of the bigger picture. Does anyone else have any questions before we really get going? Yes.
I got a question.
Yes.
Why tree diversity? I mean, I look around here and I see mostly a lot of oaks, but there's no evergreens.
No, and that's a good point. And we don't have evergreens in a park like this primarily because we don't plant a ton of evergreens, and partly because we get more bang for buck, so to speak, out of our deciduous trees. We do have...
When you say bang for the buck, what do you mean?
So we get more ecosystem services. We tend to. Our deciduous trees tend to be longer lived. They tend to aesthetically look better. We do have some evergreens, for example, in McGaw Park that are used for screening, and some of them look pretty decent. But the issue that we end up having with some of the coniferous trees is they get it gets so humid, they get rhizosphere, they start dying from the bottom up. the other thing is they can create dead spots around the base, which isn't the end of the world, but people don't like the way it looks. So aesthetically, we end up usually doing a lot more deciduous trees in our parks, unless we're specifically going for a screening situation or for a windbreak situation, which we do have both of those things in McGaw Park. In this park, we don't really have that.
So I guess when I look at park planning, you're looking to make sure the park is suitable for people more so than wildlife.
Not necessarily. It really depends upon the park. Like a park like this. So the reason why there's so many oak trees in this park is oak is our #1 species in terms of supporting wildlife. There's no other. By far and away, oak supports more species from insects all the way on up than anything else. And so we try, in parks like this, we try to have a fair bit of, a variety of oaks represented. In terms of the coniferous species that wildlife might support, that's probably better in this is more of a pass-through park. In a park like a community park like McGaw or McKee, you're going to see a lot more coniferous species because it fits into the landscape a little bit better, and we can host some of those wildlife species that you're referring to a little bit more easily, if that makes sense. Oh, you're welcome. Yes. Any other questions before we really dive in? I do appreciate the questions. And, I was just telling Chris, I haven't talked to a group of people for a long time. It's funny, in 2019, I addressed the entire Wisconsin Arborists Association, 1,000 people, and it was no big deal. And now I'm just 30 people. I don't know. It's a little bit of a different situation, because we haven't even been, in groups at all for a long time. And it's good. It's good to get back in practice. So if I kind of stumble around, or if you need clarification, feel free to just ask questions and get the clarification that you need. Yes.
Maybe you could give a suggestion of how this question would fit in. I'm understanding that the orientation here is mainly toward homeowners.
Yes.
Which doesn't include me, but I'm still wanting to learn. But also, Fitchburg does have streets.
Yes.
It doesn't have much by way of a downtown. But I wonder if, in considering tree plantings, that street trees might play some part, and what proportion of that part might go toward redressing the disparities in tree cover when affluent communities versus less affluent communities. For example, the Allied neighborhood, which I've spent some time there working on the census, and it is really striking.
Yes.
There's a lot less tree cover, and there's a lot of benefits to tree cover that those people don't have.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question that you bring up. And so in here, Allied is outside of Fitchburg, but we do have neighborhoods. Part of it, the Belmar part of that is in Fitchburg. But you bring up that's okay. It's not, but it's a good point. Regardless, it's a good point. And so the issue that we end up running into, because we are trying to plant some of our neighborhoods that are mostly multifamily housing neighborhoods, and for us they exist where you're speaking of up toward the northern part of the city, that where we hit Madison. That's called Belmar for us. Where it hits, and then also North Fish Hatchery. Yeah, no, you're fine. And then North Fish Hatchery Road, we also have a lot of multifamily housing. The issue is the terraces in those communities tend to be very narrow. So we have been planting a lot of trees in. It's a little frustrating because the terraces tend to only be 4 feet wide or smaller. So the area between the sidewalk and the road where you would plant trees it wasn't designed with trees in mind. And that's why there are no trees there. So to come in now and plant trees, you're a little bit limited by species. We've been very creative, and we have gotten as many different kinds of trees in those neighborhoods as we can. And we did do, I think Jeremy was a part of this, Jeremy, who was one of our tree advisory members, we did do a planting in North Fish Hatchery Road in 2016. We actually got an award for it where we worked with the multifamily the owners of the apartment buildings basically, and we put trees in the terrace, and then it's a slow process, but we're working with them to get more trees planted on the apartment properties, because you're right, there aren't a lot of trees in those neighborhoods, and it's definitely a disparity because they're not getting the ecosystem services that you would think, and it is something that we're cognizant of and that we're always working on. It's just an issue of there also isn't a lot of public properties in those areas. There's not a lot of parks. There's not a lot of areas where you can plant public trees. So it's a constant conversation, and we're always working on it. And we did plant, if you go, I don't know if you're familiar with High Ridge Trail, which is off of Fish Hatchery Road, we planted the terraces there all the way, because every tree in that apartment complex was an ash tree. They were all dead, they were dying, I think they're gone now. So we planted, last spring we planted the terraces there, and we did a shorter spacing to try, and so what we did is we put, big canopy tree, and then we would put smaller stature trees in so we could fit more together to try and give them a little bit more canopy faster. We'll see how that works. They all survive for the most part, but that's one of our strategies to try and address that issue. Because you're right, there is a lot of disparity in who has trees and who doesn't, and who has tree canopy and who doesn't. It's something that we're addressing. We don't have a ton of resources either. Our tree planting budget this year was $10,000, which doesn't go very far, but especially when you're removing ash trees. But it is a good point. It is something that we're working on, and they do get the diversity. We don't just throw in whatever. We do try to, do a really nice job with the planting plans and put in high quality trees that are going to last, and also give them some immediate feedback as well, if that makes sense. Yeah, and I would encourage you to go look at some of the trees in some of those neighborhoods. It's interesting what we've been able to fit into some small spaces, and they do okay. So, which is really kind of encouraging. All right. Well, should we walk around and look at trees?
Yeah, we can start right here. We don't need to walk right now, though, unless you want to. Stand. So, I'm actually glad we're here, this particular spot, because everywhere you look, you'll pretty much see what, Henry? What tree? They're all oaks, yeah. And I'll admit to a bias. I love oaks. And how many people think oaks are slow growing? Raise your hand. I counted just 2, 3, 4 people. So most of you are with it. You're in the know because they're not a slow growing tree. They grow more quickly than maples do. And a lot of people think maples are fast growing trees. The other thing about oak, they're really messy, right? They're terrible. No, they're not. What happens to acorns when they fall? The squirrels run off with them almost as fast as they hit the ground. Even bumper years, every 4th year or 6th year when it really comes down, the squirrels, and then they cache the nuts so they have things to live on in the spring and they don't go off on your flower bulbs and everything else.
But they don't find all of them.
No, they don't. And some of them grow into trees, but most do not. I live in a mature neighborhood, 100-year-old houses. We have a lot of maples. We have a lot of oaks. Guess which trees I'm pulling out of my eave trough that are growing?
The maples.
Every time. Rarely I find oak seedlings, rarely. So oaks are neater trees than they're given credit for. They're faster growing, and everyone knows oaks are pretty tough, right? White oaks, not so much, but bur oak, chinkapin oak, a lot of these oaks we're looking at right here are extremely durable trees. And if you go to older neighborhoods and look around and you find the largest trees, the massive 70-foot, 90-foot trees, chances are pretty good they're oaks. They've been there for 100 years and longer, and the maples simply don't last that long. The basswoods don't, a lot of the other trees. So let's start looking at oaks with the tree right behind us. And we're pretty sure this is what's called a northern pin oak. And one of the first things you'll notice is it has really beautiful, shiny, glossy foliage. This tree is our northern, or our native pin oak. It grows everywhere. It grows in prairies. It grows next to rivers. It grows high and dry. The thing about this oak that I've found is it's incredibly fast growing when they're younger. And we plant a lot of shorter trees, unlike most municipalities where we put in 3-foot, 4-foot high trees. Most of them we buy are container grown, so they have established root systems. They've been air pruned, which is a way to facilitate a lot of fibrous roots. And we see growth rates of 2 to 3 feet a year for about the first 10 years in these smaller oak trees. So you can have, speaking of cool trees, look at this. This must be
was donated by
K&A.
K&A Greenhouse.
It's an Eastern redwood. Actually,
Somebody's walking away with this tree tonight.
that's lovely. Thank you very much, K&A. Thank you.
That's awesome.
You can tell red buds very easily. How? Heart-shaped leaves. Exactly. So the oaks that I've measured, except for white is a slow-growing oak, and a lot of people kind of base the whole assumption about slow growth around just one of the species in the oak genus. Everything else I measure is faster than average. Literally everything I measure. This tree here, the northern pin oak, I don't have a lot of them in our village forest. I've measured 4 of them, I think, but we're seeing growth rates over 2 feet annually. And this is in difficult subdivision soil. Puts up with a lot of guff, looks beautiful, and pretty decent red fall color. Another tree.
Can I say one more thing about the northern pin?
Yeah.
So the other reason that we plant trees is we want a nice central leader so that tree can sustain storm damage, because these trees are obviously out in the open, they get a lot of wind. And so we really are looking for trees that establish a really nice central leader and can take wind and will not fall apart. And this tree definitely fits that category.
Okay. What do the root systems do in that poor soil that just has a cover over the compacted?
They're not happy.
So I haven't done a lot of work in that area. I do see trees that have died.
Yeah.
And what I notice is that the roots don't look a lot different than when we planted it.
Yeah.
You know, they basically have the shape of a pot, and they don't get much further than that. And it's amazing. 10 years can go by, and not much really has happened with the rooting of the tree. So that's the big driver of slow growth, is they don't have the chance to expand and up their resource intake.
They never really get over being planted, some of them, if the soil is really poor.
Yep.
So I didn't mean to interrupt you with about the northern pin oak.
Yeah, a great tree. They're a little tricky to find. I have been to K&H Nursery in Janesville, and I did see northern pin oak there, along with red oak. We have a red oak just past the tree, just like this one, the northern pin. One really cool thing about red oaks, if you have a shady spot, you can plant a red oak. It will grow roughly as fast as it would if it were in the sun. So it's a shade-tolerant oak. That's a little trickier to find an oak that will grow in shade, but red oak is a great example of one that does have some degree of shade tolerance. The other oak nearby and directly behind us here on your left, it looks like a swamp white to me.
I believe it is, yes. Quercus bicolor and it's named bicolor because it's got 2 different colors. The top of the leaf is a dark green, and the underside is much lighter. So that's why the Latin is Quercus bicolor, 2-color, oak with 2-color.
So one thing you'll notice about the tree is just how lustrous the leaves look. Nice, dark green. It has good presence. It just has a very substantial aspect to it that I find appealing. So we bought a house 20 years ago in an old neighborhood in Cambridge, and we planted a swamp white oak. And I water all the time, all summer long. I'm watering it, making sure it's really happy. And that tree has grown 3 feet annually and is now 40 feet tall. Swamp white oak will grow pretty much anywhere we plant them, including the terrible compacted clay soils found in subdivisions. Now, do most of you live in newer neighborhoods, older neighborhoods?
No,
And what happens when you put the shovel in?
it stops.
Yeah, well, this year it really stops, right? So again, I'll go back to the point where oaks will put up with growing in your yard regardless of where you live. You can find them.
I always hear things about not pruning them in certain months because of wilt. Is that something that's going to have to worry about a lot, or is it?
A lot.
Yes. Yes, it's a huge
never
concern.
trim
Yes.
an oak tree if it's, above 40? I mean, how?
Yeah, well,
It varies.
yeah, so you bring up a really good point. So I don't know what your policy is in Cambridge. Here, we for sure cut it off March 1, but that's not always accurate because sometimes in February we have oak wilt, it's oak wilt weather. So if it's 60 degrees for 4 consecutive days, we're done. I think that's what we kind of go with.
So if you don't trim it, you don't have to worry about it. It doesn't happen if you don't trim it.
What's the wounding?
Yeah, it's not likely to happen.
Yeah.
To happen, because they pick oak wilt up 2 ways, right?
Yes.
In the soil.
Root
and
grafting and the picnic beetles. Yeah.
So that prevents the beetles, hopefully,
Right.
from infecting the tree, but they could be holding hands, roots-wise,
Yeah.
underground, and that's another way oak wilt is transferred.
And we've been able to really avoid oak wilt, so to speak, partly because we try, and this is not universal, but, we actually had Sam knows this, we had an oak tree come down in Noble Woods, where Jeremy volunteers a lot. A part of an oak tree came down, and I told the guys, I'm like, take the whole thing down to the base, because, it's storm damage is often this time of year how oak wilt gets carried around, and basically it's a fungus that gets carried on a beetle, and those beetles, they're 20 seconds they're on an oak wound. I mean, you've got no time. As soon as that oak is wounded, those beetles are on it, and they carry the fungus, and you're done if it's if they actually have the fungus on their body. So we tend to do our oak trees in November is when we try to prune them.
And the wilt, of course, is more problematic for the red family,
Yes.
and less so for the white. Easy way to tell the difference would be red oaks have bristle tips, right? The leaves have the little sharp points.
And then
White oaks do not.
yeah, they're more rounded. They have a much more rounded type leaf.
So last thing on the swamp white oak. This tree grows in water for extended periods of time. So closest to Cambridge, the Rock River goes through, I believe, Fort Atkinson, I think that's the Rock. And there are some sloughs, areas that flood for an extended period of time in the spring, a month, even longer. And these trees sit there, it's like a bald cypress. They will grow in very low soils that get periodically inundated. Again, it's a really tough tree. Its roots simply don't require as much oxygen as most trees. It will put up with anaerobic conditions in the soil. All right, oak, yeah.
One more question. I'm very fond of bur oak.
Yes.
Do you like that tree?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Our big ancient oaks that we have here mostly are bur oak. If you look at the surveyor maps of what Fitchburg was like when the surveyors came through before Wisconsin was a state, pretty much the only tree here was bur oak. It was very open, very dry, prairie, and the only witness trees that are here that the surveyors used, the witness trees are the trees that surveyors used to as landmarks. The only tree that we had in Fitchburg were bur oaks that they noticed.
But you don't tend to plant them too much?
Yes, we plant them all the time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we do.
They're in
And
the white oak family, right?
yes,
And
yes.
They may not grow as fast, or maybe you have some other reason not to.
They need dry soil.
Dry soil. Okay.
Yes. So they're an okay terrace tree. We're actually planting some in the terrace. We have an add-on planting this spring, and we're going to put some bur oaks in where we took some ash out. I think it's dry enough. We'll see. But it's an older neighborhood, and I think the soil is fine, and it should be. Hopefully it'll be okay. But yes, we do plant a lot of bur oaks.
It's become very popular to plant bur oaks in subdivisions
It
now.
is, yeah.
It's kind of a go-to tree for that purpose. And it's interesting because the bur oaks we grow are almost always located in the worst soils.
Yes.
And they'll grow 12 inches plus a year, even in terrible conditions. If given good conditions, good drainage, water, it's a faster growing tree when young. So,
Yeah.
like I said, 2 feet plus a year for a bur oak when it's happy culturally.
Before we walk around too much and look at different trees, I just want to mention that a lot of the trees in this park were paid for by the neighborhood association. We have both Quarry Hill and Waterford Glen here. I think, is this Waterford Glen and this is Quarry Hill, if I'm not mistaken? Yes, and back before the pandemic, almost every year they would raise money to buy trees, and we'd plant them on Arbor Day. We also had Girl Scouts come in and do a program here in 19, and they raised the money and they planted some trees in this fence line. And before I came here in 2013, again, Tree Advisory, Jeremy was involved in a project where I think the grant money came from ATC, but I'm not 100% sure, to replant the fence line with a variety of different trees. So as we walk around and look at trees today, just realize it's really a group effort to get this to happen. And the citizens were very, very involved in raising the money for the trees. Oh, whoops. And the citizens who live here were very involved with raising the money for the trees and getting them planted. A lot of the trees we're going to look at today were, do you want to hang on to it? A lot of the trees that we're going to look at today were planted by volunteers. Thank you. All right.
That tree really didn't mind falling
No.
over like that. They're pretty good. Tough.
Air conditioning, appreciate it.
Yes, yes.
All right. So I've been, I can't talk enough about oaks. It's a really great go-to tree that will be there generations down the road. There's no better gift for
Yeah.
the future than planting an oak tree.
Yes, and we try to retain our oak trees when we can, but it can be tough. But we really do try to prioritize maintaining oak trees. And as we're walking around here, you'll see in the fence line here, there's 2 huge bur oak trees. They were priorities to be saved when this area was developed. And I'm not doing a very good job pointing them out, but we'll see them when we round the corner there on the edge of the park. And then there's a few in the fence line behind us as well. So when we do get these parks and when we do get this land, a lot of times it was a cornfield, but there's a tree line, and if there's bur oaks in that tree line, we really do our best to try and preserve them and keep them in good shape. When this park was designed, there were 2 ash trees here that greeted you into the park. And of course, because they're ash trees, they're no longer here. And so we changed those out for 2 ginkgo trees. And a lot of our parks were kind of going for kind of a layered effect. And these ginkgo trees, these are the, is it called autumn gold? Oh, the cultivar, I forget. Yeah, I think it is called autumn gold. They have a beautiful, kind of a cylindrical shape, and they have beautiful, beautiful kind of a brilliant yellow fall color, which is kind of what we're going for. So hopefully we'll complement kind of the reds of the oaks and things like that. So that was kind of the idea behind kind of having the ginkgo trees greet you as you're coming off the street into the park. And they do grow pretty fast, and they are pretty tough, so they can take, if they get hit by lawnmowers and things, they take that a little bit better. So at any rate, this is a really tough tree, and I don't know what your experience has been with it, Jay, in Cambridge, but we've had pretty decent luck with it here in Fitchburg.
Yeah, definitely a survivor. So this tree will put up with just about anything other than wet feet.
Yes.
The one thing it doesn't like is slow drainage.
Yeah.
Not yet anyway.
I'm ready.
So you'll notice it's unusual leaf. And if you don't like a mess in the fall, this would be probably your best choice, maybe, other than a honey locust. There are a couple of trees that have such small leaves, they just kind of decompose. But this tree will drop all of its leaves overnight when it gets close to 32 degrees. And I see it over and over again. It's so true. It goes from being fully clothed to naked. You can deal with the leaves and you're done.
Yeah.
One time.
And so it's a good tree to plant on the path for that reason. We do have sometimes issues with paths getting covered with leaves and being very slippery. We're not going to have that issue with a ginkgo as much, hopefully. Yes,
So,
Henry.
How big do ginkgo trees get?
I would say this tree will probably get about 40 to 50 feet tall, wouldn't you say, Jay?
Yeah, so I grew up in McFarland, and there's a ginkgo there that's 90 feet tall.
Oh, wow.
So that's the state record. Let's say I don't remember it from when I grew up as a kid, but obviously that tree is probably 100 plus years old. It is a very slow growing tree. I can't believe it's even 90 feet given how slowly they grow. So when we measure ginkgos, it's really common for them to literally not grow for years at a time once they've been transplanted. They take a lot of time establishing a root system, and then they push out some top growth. It's one of the slowest trees that I've measured. I don't have the number on the top of my mind, but I want to say right around 6 inches a year. We have one in our backyard that I water and I shower it with love and attention, and it grows about 12 inches a year.
Wow.
Which is probably the slowest tree I've ever grown.
Wow.
That I've been watering literally all the time, as much as I can get away with.
How wide do they get once they mature?
It would depend on the cultivar. So some of them have narrow forms maybe 20 or 30 feet.
Yeah.
Most of them are a little wider than that,
Yeah.
40.
Yes.
So how long has the ginkgo been around?
A
Boy.
long time.
It's a native, folks. It's a native.
Dinosaur days,
To
right?
Pangea,
Yes.
yes.
But they have found ginkgo leaves in the fossil record in North America, throughout North America. So a really long time ago.
Yes.
When everything was joined, it was around. But what is the age of ginkgos? Is it, I'm picking something out of thin air, but I want to say 3 million years.
I think it's
They've been around?
maybe even longer than that. I
Maybe
mean, it's
even
kind of like
longer?
horsetail. It's been around for,
How long have they been around?
well, since the dinosaurs. I mean, yeah.
So that's 60.
Yeah, at least. But yeah, I mean, they're present in the fossil record going back pretty far.
Exactly the same.
Yeah.
Fossils look exactly like this.
Yeah. And this is a Princeton century ginkgo, so this is the more globular shape.
The other interesting thing about ginkgos is that there are male and female ginkgo trees, and I hear this from arborists all the time and foresters. They
Yes.
buy a male tree because you don't want to deal with ginkgo fruit. It's really foul smelling.
It smells like vomit.
I've smelled it, and I would agree with that.
They have them in Atlanta. I saw a whole slew of them, and they weren't terrible. So I was like, well, maybe they're not spoiled enough or something. But I was kind of surprised. It was cool to see them because all of theirs were females. So I was like, oh, I get to see the fruit of the ginkgo.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Is it like after they drop and they sit for a while or something?
You might, yeah, I'm wondering if maybe were they falling? Were they on the ground or on the tree?
Ground?
Yeah, they should be smelling by that point, I would think.
Yeah.
I've never not smelled one when I've run across them myself.
There's
when they're on the ground.
There's some female ginkgo trees in the city of Madison that smell pretty awful as soon as the fruit are ripe.
Yeah, there are ginkgos in Asia that are known to be over 1,000 years old. And that's a sight when you
Yeah.
get a really large specimen and all the leaves drop at once. And you're right about the color. It is probably the best golden yellow fall color there is. I would agree with your point that the leaves color evenly, which is so unusual for
Yeah.
a tree. A lot of times you get trees, some of the trees your leaves have covered or colored, others haven't, and it seems to be in stages. Ginkgo does it all at once. So it has a lot of cool things going for it. And of course, these male cultivars are not invasive at all, obviously. Nothing to worry about there, despite it being an exotic tree. We offer ginkgos. We also offer our residents a choice in which tree they select as a terrace tree. This is the 5th most popular terrace tree we
That's
offer.
great. That's great.
Number 1, anyone guess?
Maple.
You're right, it is oak. And the reason it's not
That's
maple,
great.
we don't offer maple.
Yeah, okay. That's great.
So oak is our number 1 pick, and I just think
Yes.
that's the greatest.
No, that's great. That's great. Any questions about the ginkgos and kind of why we put them here and
Well,
what we're
I
hoping?
have a question about exotic trees. Why we add trees that are not native or close to native, and how for some plants it's a bad thing to be exotic, and others it's a good thing. So
Yeah,
I'd like
that's
to know a little more about that.
It's a great question, and I get more crap over this actually than anything else that I do, because it's a great question. The last thing we would want is to start destabilizing nature to any degree further than what we're already seeing. What is probably the most invasive tree in Wisconsin as we speak? Anyone want? That's not a tree, but kind of is,
Yeah,
isn't
kind
it? Yeah, Norway maple
Yeah.
is incredibly invasive. I see them all the time in natural settings, so it's kind of interesting. A lot of people really wouldn't think that of it as an unusual tree or an invasive tree, but it really is. Okay, to answer your question, why would we plant trees that could reseed themselves into our woodlands? We're in a cultivated setting, so most of the times people don't let things start to grow up in our subdivisions or in our downtown area, so there's less of a chance of escaping if they don't have a spot to escape. We do not use trees that potentially in any way would escape anywhere near a field or a forest. So we try to isolate those to cultivated areas only. Why do we do it? My own thing is we want an arboretum experience in our community. We want there to be all kinds of unusual trees because there's some merit in studying them to see if we can learn from them. And maybe there are trees we can choose and start to use. So we use a lot of different species. The other piece to me is kids eventually, if given the chance, notice nature. And the more unusual features that trees provide, be they acorns or horse chestnuts or buckeyes or interesting leaves, I think it engages more kids. I think it engages the community because people notice things. It's not just street after street after street of linden and maple. You know, you can't help but to see these are different or unusual looking species.
But basically what we did here is the neighborhood association had said, hey, you know, we love our park, but we'd like more shade in the path. You know, what can we do? They raised some money, the city put in some money, and we did basically a variety of trees along this path. Behind me are Cercis canadensis. This is eastern redbud. These do predate. I'm not sure who planted these. They were here. They've been here. I don't know if they predate the path or not, but they've been here for a while, and they're not in awesome shape. You can see they've been hit by lawnmowers, but they're still here, which is awesome. But moving down, you know, we have a little hackberry here, and moving down the path, there's a whole variety of different trees. We do have them outlined in a map if you'd like, and so I think what we'll do is we'll walk down and talk about the different trees on the path. But if you do need to go because it's been over an hour, that's totally understandable. We won't be offended if folks have other things they need to do and they need to go make dinner or do whatever. Yes.
Is that a willow?
That is a willow. So that willow tree. Yes, it is. That is a volunteer, and you know, we'll just leave it. Stormwater asked me what I think, and I'm like, well, you know what the heck. We'll entertain it for the moment. There is a lot of black locust. You can see that we did mow black locust, which has a clonal response to that. So we do have a very invasive black locust issue here that's got to get taken care of. But that's a different issue. So anyway, so I guess we're just gonna walk down and I'll talk a little bit about each tree, and we won't go too much into it. But if you have a question, let me know. Here we do have these. This tree was just planted last fall, and that is a hackberry, I believe, if I'm looking at it correctly, right?
Or linden?
Oh, is it?
Oh no, it's an elm.
Oh, it's a hybrid elm. Geez, I can't even see. Okay, sorry. This is a hybrid elm. Sorry, I couldn't see it in the sun. So this is a hybrid elm, and the idea with the hybrid elms is they are a very fast-growing tree. This variety does have some interesting fall color, and we planted it here kind of as a buffer between the stormwater facility and the path. So this is one of our fast-growing trees. They don't last long. I mean, they're not super long-lived, but
So they're not long-lived like the traditional elm?
No.
Oh, okay.
No. And traditional elms, you know, American elms aren't long-lived now because of Dutch elm. But that's why we plant these. But they do grow really quickly, and they do have a lot of they can have an interesting fall color.
So this is a great tree to choose if you want something fast growing. A number of elm cultivars have great fall color, yellows and reds. The other great thing about elms, they have that classic vase shape, which is just incredible. It's beautiful. Our elm trees grow 28 inches annually.
Wow.
In terrible conditions. So that is a fast growing tree. We've seen 3 to 4 feet on some trees some years, if it's a wet year during the peak growing times.
And we've tried a lot of different cultivars for the elm, and we're kind of sticking with, I think this is either a Frontier or New Horizon, and we're trying it because they have better form and they have really kind of a nice red color, purpley kind of color. So at any rate. Yeah, so this maple is a State Street maple. So this is Acer Miyabi. It's an Asian blend of tree, and we do have a lot of maples, but I did plant it here. It has beautiful fall color. It has a nice shape. As you're coming around the path, it really does greet you in the fall, and so that's why we put it here. We do a few maples here and there, and this is one of the ones that we did. And if you are looking for a maple, the Miyabi it can be a nice choice. I don't know if you have good luck with them in Cambridge or if you even plant them.
We do, yeah,
Okay.
and it's faster growing, right around 20 inches annually, and good yellow fall color, and it's actually somewhat closely related to Norway maple.
Yeah.
And it is like a better behaved, faster growing, less invasive Norway maple if you need that kind of thing.
Yeah. And in the fall, when you're coming in this path, as you're running that path, this tree really says hello.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful day. Moving on, this is a honey locust. Similar kind of where we get the red color with this tree, we get kind of a nice golden yellow with this one, which is why we planted it. The reason that we really kind of try to focus on fall color is we did a survey. Actually, before I worked here, in 2015, there was a survey done, and fall color was the #1 reason why people like trees. So we've really been trying to make sure that as we're planting trees, we really keep that in mind and try and keep a complementary color scheme going in September, so people really can appreciate the trees at that point in time as well.
Yeah, in a good year, this tree has brilliant yellow fall color, not unlike that of a ginkgo.
Yeah.
Just a really nice, soft, even coloring, buttery yellow. What is the #1 reason to plant a honey locust?
You don't have to rake up the leaves?
That's it.
Oh.
Do you see how small these leaves are? They go into the ground, they disappear into the grass, they add nitrogen to the mix, and you literally don't have to rake up after a honey locust tree.
Is there any preference for the kinds of locusts? I notice there are different types out there.
Well, you don't want to plant a black locust. That's a different genus.
But then among the others?
Oh, of the cultivars?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the commonly available cultivars, Skyline, Shade Master, they're all
good.
They're all great trees. Imperial, Street Keeper, we use them all. And I think to me, they look all the same. Okay. I don't really see much difference. One of them is more narrow, Street Keeper, but the rest of them they have different habits eventually. Okay. But it's a great choice for a lawn tree. They can look beautiful if they're trimmed over the years. You know, they tend to have a very graceful form, and again, no raking.
Does it help a tree's health to trim off the branches that are lower to the ground?
It does. Yeah, this is terrible, Anna.
Yeah, it is terrible.
And I mispronounced your name.
That's okay. No, that's fine. I've been called much worse. But yeah, so, and this park is on the schedule to get pruned. I think it's either this year or the next year. We have a 5-year pruning cycle. I wish it was shorter, but it's the way it goes. It's just about people power. And you're right, that tree does need a haircut. So. No, we have employees who do our pruning, and we contract out, so we don't have a lot of people. The only person who's employed in forestry is me and Sam, and we don't work full time. So we end up contracting a lot, but we contract out the stuff that we know is easy to direct and easy to put in a contract. Tree planting, we contract that out. And it's pretty binary. You either plant the tree correctly or you don't. Pruning, there's a little bit more magic to it, and so we do that in-house. Moving along, we do have the volunteer willow, which I kind of like. We don't plant willow. We don't plant willow, but that one's a volunteer. This is one of our lovely native trees that does very, very well here, and it's one of the trees that we often retain when we get land. When new developments go in, this is a common hackberry. And there often are some really nice hackberries and bur oaks and the properties that we receive when we get parkland dedication, and we try to maintain them. And this is a hackberry that we planted here, and it actually looks pretty good. We planted this 2 years ago. Usually
they look a little like an elm,
yes,
almost in their shape, their habit as they get older. And it's interesting. We offer these almost every year, and I've never had someone request a hackberry.
Oh,
they just get no respect.
Oh, I love them.
Yeah,
they are a great wildlife tree. They are a fabulous wildlife tree. Yeah, and they do very well for us. So we plant Kentucky coffee trees primarily because I like them. They look kind of funny to start with because it takes them a while to get established, but they have kind of a unique shape, and they are a native tree, and they do offer a lot of opportunity for wildlife, which is.
You've got to see this, folks. We're talking about a Kentucky coffee tree. How many people would say this is native? Raise your hand.
No, because of the name.
Nobody. It's not an assumption you'd make. We had a couple of people who are hip to this. So it is native. And actually, one of the tallest Kentucky coffee trees in the nation is just south of Sumner, which is near Lake Koshkonong, not too far north of Janesville. And that tree is 112 feet tall, so they get massive with age. This is a great example of why Kentucky coffee tree has a bad rap, because they look so ugly
When they start.
when they're juveniles. They're ugly ducklings. There's one I noticed as we were walking in by the ginkgos,
Yes.
though, that's larger,
Yes.
and they become beautiful swans with
Yes.
time.
We'll see that as we leave.
Yeah, ornamental bark. This tree has Kentucky coffee tree seeds, which are pretty obnoxious. I don't know if you plant the male cultivars.
We do. It's decaf. This is decaf, the male cultivar decaf. And we
There's
do
also one skinny latte.
skinny latte, and then espresso is one that we plant in Smart Code.
So there are male versions of it. There are a lot of reasons to plant this tree, and with time, they're really gorgeous. It's a little bit like a honey locust, I think. Airy, open. It's easy to grow grass under this tree if that's important to you. Another reason not to plant Norway maple, because they're so heavily shaded. It's almost impossible to grow grass under a large Norway maple.
And it
But we-
offers a lot of wildlife interest as well.
So when you see the more mature version of this tree, I think you'll be impressed. This, not so much.
I should have my magnifying glass. At any rate, so we do plant different hybrid oaks, and one of the hybrid oaks that we plant is called Quercus shootii, and it's a hybrid between bur oak and swamp white oak, and that's probably what this tree is. And it kind of fooled me, but I think you're right. Ah, jeez.
And a lot of times when they combine trees, the parentage of trees, they're faster growing. Hybrids, for whatever reason, are faster growing than the two parent species. And I've heard anyhow that this can be a fast growing tree.
That's why we plant them, and we get a lot of traction with the hybrid. We also plant sometimes heritage oaks, which is a English oak, bur oak hybrid as well. Do you have a question, Henry?
How do you make hybrids?
Oh, well, that's a good question. So that's oaks hybridize on their own, but they're cultivated basically, and it's a long process. Can I tell you about it later?
Does it involve grafting?
Yeah. With the oaks, I don't believe so. Do you know, Jay? I don't think they're grafting these.
That's a good question.
I don't think
I know
so.
they used to, but with oaks, I think it can be tricky.
Yes.
My guess is that the acorns produced
Yes.
by these trees would be pretty true to form,
Yeah.
and that they're probably, I know there are a lot of them sold for conservation purposes,
Yes.
and those are all acorn derived.
Yes.
So my guess is that they would be pretty stable from an acorn.
Yeah. A lot of trees are grafted, and a lot of our rootstock, or a lot of our nursery trees in Wisconsin are from the West Coast, and they're grafted. But the oaks are not, and I'm pretty certain that this is acorn grown and not grafted.
Great. Is everyone able to see this bald cypress tree? Can you believe that a bald cypress would be hardy this far north? They are. They're fully hardy. We reached minus 30 back in January of 2019. Remember the polar vortex? So, and it got as cold as minus 32 in the lowest elevation in our village, which is 40 feet lower along a creek. And all of our bald cypress survived minus 30, and some minus 32. Great fall color, some years, other years so-so. It's kind of a peach color. And then it's a conifer, but it drops its needles. So it's like a large tree, an American larch. The other one is a dawn redwood, which is fully hardy right here in Wisconsin.
We can grow those here?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we have 100% survival of our bald cypress, 100%. Every tree has lived. We're 80% on dawn redwood. Both of them are tough trees that will more than put up with our winters. And dawn redwood is a fast-growing tree. Bald cypress, I would put it in the middle of the boat, if not a little slower. Bald cypress will grow in standing water all year long, literally all year long.
Creates the knees, the famous knees of the
Correct.
Okefenokee Swamp.
really cool tree, and I see them available much more frequently than I have in the past. So also nice orange fissured bark as they mature. It's an interesting, and they have really cool little 1-inch cones. Not bad for a conifer. Usually conifers have large obnoxious cones. And the thing about the bald cypress cones is they break apart as they dry out. So no raking, right? Because the leaves fall and you can see there's nothing to them. And the fruit basically falls apart before it hits the ground. So it's one of the cleanest landscape trees you could plant.
And how big does it get?
So 60, 70 feet. I think they get up to 100 down south. But there are some 50 to 60 foot tall bald cypress in the Arboretum in Madison that were planted in the 1950s.
That's part of our inspiration. So this was the capstone tree I really wanted everyone to see. That's kind of why we dragged you all down here. The other thing I just wanted to point out, as it's been mentioned, with the tree line, we did save the big bur oaks. We also saved some black cherry. They're a much faster growing tree. The reason we do that is they have a lot of wildlife interest. They're caterpillar sort of factories. While bur oak is our #1 wildlife species, black cherry is our #2. So we do try to maintain those as we can. It's a little bit harder because they do grow really quickly. They grow towards the sun. They often have really crummy form and they fall apart. But you can see we do have, these two trees, these two little black cherry trees. I don't think they're more than probably 4 or 5 years old. And look how, they do fill in pretty quickly. So while we're planting a lot of trees, we also try to nurture the native stuff along as well, as we can. I guess that's probably kind of the conclusion of our program tonight. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for coming, for the second date. We really appreciate your attendance and your time and your attention. And I really hope that everyone got some nuggets about tree diversity. And if you're thinking about planting a tree, there's a lot of different things to choose from. And if you want to walk through any of our parks, you'll see a lot of different kinds of trees that you could plant in your yard as well. So I guess that's kind of where we'll leave it. But if you have any questions, just let us know. We'll stay around for a few more minutes. And thank you very much.